Alright guys, I think we nailed down one of the best builds in Wuchang Fallen Feathers. This is also the one that pretty much carried me all the way to the end game and let me absolutely one-shot every single boss in the game, not dying one single time the moment I got this. But basically, let me introduce you to the dual blade Lich Queen build that lets you pretty much face tank almost any enemy in the game and makes you almost immortal, at least compared to all other builds. So let me just show you how this plays like. We're obviously going to use a very early on weapon called the Firearm Blade, which kind of has a couple of things going for it. One is that it's a dual blade, so this build has a ton of clashes baked into it, meaning that you're going to be deflecting tons of attacks and also healing during the process. But it also features a very cool perfect aim attack that is very good at building up stagger, shooting targets, and even auto-dodging in the process. This is a very spammy build that generates a ton of Skyborn mites, and in my opinion, it's one of the easiest to nail down if you know what you're doing. So let's jump into the build, starting with, of course, the skill tree. So here's what we're working with in terms of the build itself. Obviously, what enables this playstyle with the clashes most are 4 abilities right here in the Blade's skill line. Specifically, Feather Chaser early on, but we also get to use the Leaf Slasher, then the Deadly Shadow, and also add the Blade Master technique on top. So essentially, Feather Chaser already gives your melee, your light melee attacks with the dual blades to gain a chance to clash when you hit an enemy as it's about to swing its weapon. So if they collide mid-air, you're going to now deflect the majority of that incoming damage. However, with this build, we're actually going to deflect all of that damage. But besides that, you will also gain Skyborn Might every time it clashes, meaning that this is also going to be a very spammy build. Now, to bring this to the next level, we're going to immediately have to go for the Leaf Slasher. This makes it so that every 4th, 5th, and 6th attack with the dual blade light attack combo will now guaranteed gain clash. So by this point, you can imagine that the majority of your attacks will now gain clash pretty much no matter what, as long as both you and your enemies are in an attack sequence. But we're going to go even beyond that. So Deadly Shadow basically makes it so that your clashes will now also happen when you perform a dash attack. So dash attack now gets a guaranteed clash, which is going to be very helpful, meaning that at the start of the combo attack, you're already going to get that guaranteed. And finally, we're going to top it off with the Blade Master technique. This is going to be a buff that's very cheap to cast, but this is going to make it so that your clashes now also give you HP, so you literally get healing from the clashes, and it's also going to make your attacks even quicker. So if attacks are even quicker, this means even more chances for your attacks to clash with that of your enemy's weapon. However, that is also the caveat, I would say. This is only going to work if an enemy wields a physical weapon. So if it's attacking with claws, for example, or if it's kicking you, obviously the clashes will not trigger, but everything else is fair game. And in terms of all of the other nodes over here, you're going to see that we have a lot in terms of vitality and also endurance. So this is going to be a build that quickly reaches high stamina and also high HP levels. Besides that, you will want to also focus on agility, as that's going to be the primary stat multiplier you have. If you want some extra, and what I'm doing right now is also work towards something in the X line, as you have quite a few early on nodes over here for even more vitality, since you will be face tanking. Everything else over here is pretty much going to focus a lot on Skyborn Might, so that is why we're going with Skyborn Call all the way to level 3, so we get 5 feathers, so we can spam our abilities even more. In terms of everything else, obviously upgrades for your flasks, but what's going to be most important are these 2 lines over here, specifically the one that brings you to the Leech Bone Needle. This is going to give you even more sustain, and you're going to just basically be capable of staying in the enemy's face and face tank against them. If it's an enemy that uses swords or similar weapons, it's game over for them, because you're going to deflect all of that incoming damage while healing at the same time in case any of them pass the clash. And also Rapid Temperance, so we can activate that a little bit quicker in the middle of the boss fight in case we need to refresh. That is why I suggest Alteration and Temper as your next point from this point on, so that you can insert more needles and also get more charges in the middle of combat. Now, in terms of the sockets, this is what I've been using. Early on, blocking clash helps a ton, increases potency of blocks and clashes. So this is what's going to make it so that now no damage passes those clashes, or it's going to be very minimal, almost to the point of being undetected. In terms of the memory one, we do have a couple of options, the earliest being Skyborn Vigor. This is just going to increase stamina recovery. In case you don't need that, you can totally go with something like the Backstab Rejuvenation, or you can also get Obliteration Might. This is just going to increase your damage and grant Skyborn Might. Also very useful since this build is able to stun relatively well. And obviously for the final one, I'm going with consecutive attacks, increase damage, since yeah, we do consecutive attacks all the time, so we're gonna see our damage increasing even more. Now, as far as the main weapon goes, obviously we're gonna use the Firearm Blade. What this has is the perfect aim. It's also a very early weapon, and this is an amazing ability to have. You basically perform a dodge and you shoot at the target, pretty much lodging an explosive into their body. So after like 1 or 2 seconds, that is going to explode, staggering them in the process. Well, mini staggering at first and building up the poise meter a little bit. However, since we generate so much Skyborn Might, there are moments you can pretty much unleash 4 or 5 of these in quick succession and quickly build up all of that poise meter and eventually stun the target altogether. You can see over here, for example, in the case of this boss, I was pretty much going ham at it with all of the shots against it, but it's so good to have, and it's also going to have an auto dodge baked into its own attack. In terms of the pendants, if we're talking about trash mobs, Twin Infant Pendant for the extra stamina regen, Lifesteal Pendant, obviously since we're going from enemy to enemy, and Dragon Link Pendant, increasing our slash damage. You can have some replacements over here, like one that reduces the damage that you take. You can also go with the one that increases damage against large enemies. So this depends on you, but early on I don't think you have too many options. So let me show you what we're doing over here in terms of typical trash mobs, and then we're going to go against the bosses. Obviously, we're going to go ahead and try to activate the Blade Master as much as possible. That's going to be a buff that increases the speed of our attacks and also gives us healing on clashes. And with the dash attack, you're going to start with right away. That's a guaranteed clash, and from that point on, pretty much clashes non-stop, which give you the healing sustain you need even without activating the Leech mechanic. If it's an enemy that's particularly difficult, you can definitely use that perfect shot, which is going to give you the auto dodge and also build up the stagger on them. But every now and then you will see it explode, so it's going to constantly interrupt its attacks even when it's a boss. So overall, trash mobs, very accessible unless you're doing something very wrong. Now, against some of the boss fights, let me show you a couple of scenarios over here. So one of these is obviously an enemy that you know from my previous stream that we had quite a bit of trouble with another build I was testing out. However, with this build, I'm not really doing anything, just going in, attacking with the Leech on, and as you can see, it's clashing with its attacks, and anything that passes, I can just get back via the Leech from this point on. So overall, very spammy, very tanky, very high survivability, and look how quickly we were able to build up that stagger meter against it. It's just a shame that it enters another phase, and unfortunately we cannot get it at the time being, but it should be after one of the attacks. Now, obviously, it's not going to be fully perfect, so sometimes you might have to heal, you might have to disengage and activate it, but yeah, look at that. We just got the stun in, so from this point on, it's very easy. And like you can see, I'm stacking as many of those mini explosions as I can and getting blasted in the face in the process. But look how quickly it builds up the stagger meter. Plus, we generate all of the Skyborn Might so easily. So theoretically, if it did not die this fast, I would be able to get it stunned one more time at the very least. But like I said, in the middle of the combat, I would disengage a little bit, reactivate Leech, and go back at the same process. That is why having at least a couple of stacks of Temperance is so useful. You're going to pretty much go through most of the boss fights this way. Now, I also went against the General of the North just to show you another scenario when I was actually getting hit by the attacks and wasn't clashing quite as much, but it still didn't matter because with the Leech activated, I was just face tanking all of the attacks. It literally did not matter that this boss was using its attacks and spamming everything against me. And if you saw my previous stream, you know we had a bit of a trouble with this as well. But I mean, it didn't really matter at all because how strong this build is. Again, the only downside I can think of is the fact that if the enemy does any other attack besides swinging its sword or axe or other similar melee weapon, you're not going to have any clashes. So in case you fight one of those monsters, you may want to go with something else. And that pretty much concludes today's video. Let me know down below if you used this before or if there's any other variation you're using. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.